Unfortunately, we're at a position now where the government's embarking on negotiations that are going to lead to one of two things. Either a bad deal, and that includes the possibility of us leaving the EU without knowing the future relationship with the European Union, or no deal. And both those options will be deeply damaging to London and the country. So what I'm saying to the government is, for the first time, the British public should have a say on the outcome of those negotiations, including the option of staying in the EU.
I don't want a second referendum. I don't think that's the right answer. And
Aren't
I think
you moving dangerously close towards it, though? You and your colleagues who will vote this down, I could show you a chart, you've probably seen it in the papers as well, where this could deliver us towards a second referendum. You must at least be alive to that.
I'm alive to all sorts of risks, and you have to balance them and see how they're possible. Sir David Nartzler, in his very important evidence to the Brexit Select Committee, made it clear that short of legislation, there is no parliamentary mechanism to get a referendum. And bear in mind, we leave on the 29th of March, so there's now very little time to put in place a second referendum without further legislation. And how's that going to get through Parliament? I think that would be very difficult. But Douglas's point on the question, I think, is a relevant one, because most people who want a second referendum just want to overturn the result of the first referendum. It's the loser's referendum.
We must have other options. And conference, that must include campaigning for a public vote. It's right that Parliament has the first say. It's right that Parliament has the first say. But if we need to break the impasse, our options must include campaigning for a public vote, and nobody is ruling out Remain as an option.
My mind is actually changing on this.
Go on.
What is for certain is that the Cleggs, the Blairs, the Adonises will never, ever, ever give up. They will go on whinging and whining and moaning all the way through this process. So maybe, just maybe, I'm reaching the point of thinking that we should have a second referendum.
On what?
On EU membership.
The whole thing?
Yes, of course, of course. Unless you want to have a multiple choice referendum.
No.
Which would confuse people.
I'm
I think if we had a second referendum on EU membership, we'd kill it off for a generation. The percentage that would vote to leave next time would be very much bigger than it was last time.
The government is in effect collapsing, and Britain has the choice between a very soft Brexit, a Norway-style Brexit, or possibly a referendum and no Brexit at all. And that is where you are leading.
No, I don't think either of those things are remotely likely. And I think both of them would be a betrayal of the referendum result, as Steve Buckley was saying just now. I think that both the Norway solution and a second referendum have grave, grave defects. The Norway solution, as Steve was saying just now, would mean that we were subject to EU regulation over an even broader swathe of things than we are under the current, under the deals proposed by the Prime Minister. And as for a second referendum,
you're against it.
I think the people of this country would think it was absolutely extraordinary to, ask them to vote again when the politicians haven't even implemented the verdict of the first referendum. And just go back to...
Have you ever contemplated a second referendum as a way out of this?
No, I don't want a second referendum.
There is a case, isn't there, for a referendum on the terms of Brexit?
We are not supporting or calling for a second referendum. What we've called
in any circumstances?
What we've called for is a meaningful vote in Parliament, and that is the one area that I think Parliament has asserted itself just in the vote before Christmas.
We're going to go to the break in a second, but I just want to point out to you that when you are talking very much in the present tense at the moment, you're saying we are not supporting a second referendum. You're not saying we would never support a second referendum.
We're not calling for one either.
What do you think?
I think it's an option for the future, but it's not an option for today, because if we put a referendum tomorrow, what's it going to be on? What's the question going to be?
What would you like the question to be on? Would you like Remain to be on the ballot paper?
I think that the tests against the government have to be put now, and that's what we're doing. The government must go back and renegotiate and see what it comes back with, and Parliament must look at that time. I think to do anything else now would be to ignore the reality of the situation is that this government has had all this time to negotiate and hasn't really achieved anything.
I'm for a people's vote. We've heard it's the job of the government to plan for a people's vote, the job of Her Majesty's opposition to plan for a people's vote, and of course the job of the EU as well to plan for our people's or public vote. You know what? I don't care what you call it. It's all about what it delivers that's most important. Because I think ordinary people, having witnessed what happened yesterday, are in a mixture of just being appalled, slightly embarrassed about what happened yesterday, and finding themselves in a situation whereby they despair at the state of British politics. And they will despair at us as parliamentarians, though we are willing and want to step up and play our part. We always have been. This is actually nothing new, and many of you as commentators will know that many of us have complained from the very outset that Parliament has always been excluded from the Brexit process and trying to help to shape and find a way of reaching a pragmatic consensus. Every single person here has tried and has called to be part of that process in the last 2.5 years. And at every twist and turn, Parliament's been excluded, and yesterday was the culmination of that, and that is not good enough. So we want a people's vote for all the reasons that most of you are very well familiar with. But it's not just about getting, it's the only way now for the government to get out of this unholy, unprecedented mess. But it's actually an opportunity for the British people to have what I think they have a right to have, and that's a final say. Now they know what Brexit looks like, and now they, I think, begin to appreciate that the current deal that we have with the EU is the best deal we can ever get.
And I think Parliament will go through what are all the potential alternatives, and that will include, obviously, the possibility that if Parliament can't reach an agreement, if there's a blockage, essentially, in Parliament, then we go back to the people in order for the issue to be resolved and resolved finally. So, but I don't think there's a majority in Parliament for no deal. I think, on the contrary, there's a big majority in Parliament against no deal. The question is there another deal if her deal fails? And then if you can't get agreement for anything, go back to the people. I think there's such disagreement now about what form Brexit should take. Really, the only way you can resolve this, and we've had 30 months of negotiation, is to go back and ask the people, come on, what do you really think now? Do we carry on with Brexit? And if we do, then it's going to be, you know, the hard Brexit that the true Brexit people want, or do you remain in the European Union?
I think some really eloquent remarks have been made already on this. But of course, the fact is that it's the motion is sort of couched in these terms of sort of if there's a deal, if there's not a deal, blah, 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 etc. Actually, you don't give a damn about whether there's a deal or not. You just hate the fact that you lost. You lost, right? It's as simple. You're losers, right? You hate being losers. You lost. You lost the argument fair and square. In one of his various moments of candour, the mayor actually said this, yes, we lost the argument, right? You did. And to start kind of having this kind of ghost-like campaign of going over all the same claims that we went over throughout the referendum campaign is extremely demoralising, and also, as has been said, unbelievably patronising to the people who voted 2 years ago. It is quite extraordinary, actually, the level to which people will sink in these arguments, because what you're more or less saying is, well, you didn't know, but we did, right? We did. We're voting to remain. So we did understand all, but you didn't. But they understood completely. What I would say about this kind of Project Fear thing we've got going on, which is going on, and I think was actually pretty disgraceful yesterday in the PCC committee, when you're talking about the law enforcement agencies actually starting to indulge in Project Fear. That is bad, right? I think, no, it's not a fact. At the same time, go back with Project Fear. Go back to 1975. If Steve has already mentioned this, if I could suggest you look on YouTube, a great clip, your party, before it became a moral cesspit. Peter Shaw Peter Shaw, when Labour was a brilliant party full of great people, he was arguing against the EU. He was saying exactly the same thing as being said now. He was saying, you're being told there'll be no food. You're being told there'll be no medication. All of these things, that is all that time ago. None of your arguments stand up because none of them have changed. So I absolutely oppose this motion, and I do it also on the grounds that you are playing, people who support this motion are playing seriously with fire when it comes to democracy. Not just, as Steve said, he's quite right, that people will be unhappy, but actually their whole idea of what democracy means in this country will actually start to fail. And God knows what could happen. So I completely and utterly support my friends here in opposing this motion. Thank you.